is very close to my heart. So, being the last session of the day, I'm cognizant that it's going to be a little bit of almost a tiring day for you all. So I will try and see as much as possible. I'll try to be less academic and more practical issues which we are facing in the tax holiday matter on domestic transfer pricing. Just as a backdrop, we have seen the litigation in the transfer pricing arena almost going significantly in some kind of a 40 to 50% growth every year. And the last year, right now the numbers, I don't know what the numbers will come out for this last cycle, but the previous cycle was around some 70,000 crores. Now, the point is that this essentially the numbers which were there were in relation to international transfer pricing, transactions of cross-border. And 2012 Finance Act, we saw domestic transfer pricing being introduced. And till now, we haven't seen the corporates really being awakened to the issues on domestic transfer pricing, or they are not very, very sensitive. And this is what I just recall. When international TP was introduced, in the initial years, not many corporates were very, very sensitive to it. It's only when it came back and hit them very hard that people awoken, and thereafter it became a big flourishing profession for a lot of professionals, including myself. And this is the same thing which I am seeing, that for domestic TP as of now, we have not seen that big concern from because it is mainly concerning the Indian corporates. But let few years go, few assessments happen, and you will find the same wave of litigation happening and demand for domestic TP professionals going up significantly. So that's the good news for all of you who are looking at domestic TP as some kind of area to specialize on. Just as a backdrop, now we know that 2012 the finance minister, leveraging on the observations of Supreme Court in GlaxoSmithKline, he introduced transfer pricing to certain domestic transactions, essentially transactions covered under section 48(2)(b), and to certain transactions, tax holiday transactions. Now, what happened in that Supreme Court decision, very briefly, I'm sure everybody has heard about that particular thing, but if you look at it, the Supreme Court had emphasized and had tried to direct the government to bring transfer pricing only in non-neutral transactions. So the subject matter in the Glaxo decision was where there was a cross-charge between the two same group companies, and there was a fight which went to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court said, what are you fighting for? One is claiming deduction, other is offering us taxation. Where's the leakage to the revenue? And thereafter it gave a suggestion saying that even if you want to make this particular thing subject matter of transfer pricing, then the law needs to be amended. And Supreme Court gave some guidance over there saying, it gives recommendations that it should essentially be relevant in cases where there is a tax arbitrage, essentially involving transactions where one entity is loss making, other is profit making, one is enjoying holiday, another is tax paying entity. Now, and then it gave recommendations to the CBP saying that they should apply transfer pricing provisions to domestic transactions, and that they should come out with some kind of guidance or change the law. Now, based on that, the law has been changed, but unfortunately, the way the law has come out is it applies not only to tax arbitrage transactions, it applies to all transactions which are covered in the 48(2)(b) as well as the tax holiday transactions. So essentially, if you look at it, Supreme Court tried to bring out saying that if there is one loss making, one profit making, then there is a tax arbitrage, and that is where you should look at trying to apply these kind of provisions to see if there is a tax leakage. Similarly, tax holiday and tax paying company. Now, because yes, obviously in both these cases there is a loss to the revenue, and that's the reason TP should be made applicable. But unfortunately, as I said, the law has now come out to cover without exception whether it is a neutral, tax neutral, or a tax arbitrage transaction. both are subject to domestic transfer pricing. And there is one particular residuary clause which the government has kept in section 92BA, which actually defines the specified domestic transaction to say any other transaction that may be prescribed. Now I can tell you the day is not far that you will find some transactions further being notified, especially the reason being, if you look at section 188 of the Companies Act, which requires not only the expense side, even the income side to be subject to ALP, and if that is not followed, there are going to be a lot of, I would say, consequences. So eventually, if the law, somewhere in other law, the income side of transactions are also covered, then the government would be tempted to even cover those transactions under the income tax, because that really becomes a very big area for them to look at. It's literally like, today if international transaction is one, after they make such kind of amendments, the domestic transfer pricing will be maybe 500 or 1000. So the ratio of trying to garner the new avenues will be very, very high. So as we advise our clients, it will be very, very helpful if we also tell them that not only take cognizance of the current law, which really talks about essentially 4820, which is expenditure side, and tax holiday, yes, that covers the income side also, but to factor in even those transactions which are on the income side and still not covered under the SDT definition. Yes, and the other part is when the domestic transactions all taken together exceed 5 crore, obviously it gets covered. So this was broadly the background of more of a warm-up to what we would like to discuss. I would just discuss some provisions relating to the tax holiday, and thereafter we will dive into the relevant issues, and once we have debated the issues, we would just look into the few case studies. So broadly, if you look at it, the sections, the tax holiday sections which are there and which are very, very relevant in today's context are section API-A, API-B, API-AB, API-AC, ID, and 10AA. So most relevant is API-A, where they're still quite active, 10AA, the special economic zones, and whichever API-C and API-B. So the two sections which are the most relevant for all of these, where API 8 and 10 is imported into all these sections by way of a cross-reference, and these are the two sections which we are currently going to focus on for the purpose of our debate today. So let's go to section API 8. Now section API 8 essentially talks about inter-unit transfer, and what I would just do is, as we go along, we can actually just go and read the relevant sections also to make it more relevant for the purpose of our discussion. If you look at section API 8, it talks about So it talks about where any goods or services held for the purpose of eligible business are transferred. Now, some of the words which are very relevant here are for the purpose of eligible business are transferred. So goods and services held for the purpose of business, for the purpose of eligible business, are transferred to any other business, and vice versa. But there are some important words I'm emphasizing, and which we will really get into the discussion. So the first question which comes, and okay, let me just also read some other words which are here. Held for the purpose of any other business carried on by the assessee are transferred to eligible business, and again this is very important, and in either case the consideration, if any, for such transfer as recorded in the accounts of eligible business does not correspond to the market value of such goods and services. So now 92BA says refers to transfer of goods and services as referred to in section API 8. Now, which are the transactions which are covered under section API 8? So let's say there are 2 units, there is some kind of a transfer of goods and services which happened, and let's say that those happen correspond to market value of goods, and market value of goods as per the amended proviso that it meets the arm's length criteria. So if it meets the arm's length criteria, then would it still fall under section API 8? Because it is now corresponding to the market price. If it is not corresponding to the market price, then that is the reason that you have to get it covered under API 8 and make an adjustment to the tax holiday deduction. Now this particular debate started that if I am meeting at arm's length price, then am I really covered under STT, and do I really need to report a transaction? Or the interpretation is that the moment I have a transaction, inter-unit transaction, whether it corresponds to market price or the ALP or not, it is subject to STT and it needs to be reported also. Now, if we look at the intention of the legislature, clearly when there is an inter-unit transfer of goods and services, it ought to be covered. There is an interpretation which somebody could explore, but I'm sure, like looking at the intent, courts will finally held that no, it ought to be covered, even though if it is at arm's length. The only thing which can then arise is, can we really try to rely on the, or rather refer to the proviso to take further strength to this particular argument, which says that for the purpose of this subsection, market value in relation to any goods or services mean A, the price that such goods and services would ordinarily fetch in the open market, or the arm's length price as defined in section 92F, where transfer of such goods and services is a specified domestic transaction. Now if you have to just take a meaning that way, that if I'm at arm's length price, then I'm not covered in this particular section, then this proviso, which is actually a circular proviso, will lose its relevance. So looking at all the things taken together, the right interpretation is that inter-unit transfer of goods and services ought to be covered. Now there are many things which we are going to discuss about this particular inter-unit transaction, but the first basic premise is that yes, the principle is that you will have to report it even if it is at arm's length price. The issues on eligible business and what goods and services need to be covered, we are then just going to cover in the subsequent slide. First, I'm just discussing the basic of the sections. Similarly, API 10, this essentially relates to one tax holiday unit of a taxpayer versus another taxpayer, which is a closely related person. So what does the section read about? It talks about where it appears to the assessing officer, owing to the close connection between the assessee carrying on the eligible business. Again, the word eligible business, this is something going to be our focus discussion, to which this section applies, and any other person, or for any other reason, the course of business between them is so arranged that the business transacted produces to the assessee more than ordinary profits. So again, here the reference point is that the transaction which is covered under API 10 are those transactions where the taxpayer is dealing with a person, closely connected person, and that is producing more than ordinary profits. So if the transaction is not producing more than ordinary profits, the question again comes in whether that transaction is subject to STT. Now again, at least here the section is quite a bit more clearer, and the argument for the purpose of API 10 can be more, I would say, stronger compared to API 8 to take this particular premise. In fact, if you look at the form of the STT, and in that if you look at between API 8 and API 10 transactions, API 10 transaction comes and it just says whether you have entered into any business with closely connected person which results in more than ordinary profits, and you have to say yes or no. But the same thing is not there at time of API 8. So the point again comes in, okay, so should we take a stand it's not STT? My suggestion is, when you look at the particular form, at the beginning of the STT section, you report it in the total quantum, and when you come to API 10 section, the clause, you may just want to say, based on your benchmarking and support, saying that no, there is no more than ordinary profits, and that's why you report no over there. So effectively, you are not going to give all the transactions over there in terms of all your inter-group or inter-related transactions, because you believe that the transactions are at arm's length. But the same premise may not be possible when you are reporting under API a particular transaction. Some just important terms, if you look at it, section 92 talks about ALP. ALP is defined in 92F, which takes you to 92C. Then again 48(2)B talks about fair market value. This is the pre-amendment situation I am talking about, and fair market value definition as such was never defined what it meant. It was a more broader kind of a term. API 8 spoke about market value. Again, market value is a very, very broad term. Compared to an ALP, the difference between ALP and the market value, I would say, is ALP identifies, works out a single point number based on your benchmarking. FMV, market value, can be any point in a range. So it could be anything, anybody goes out in the market, let's say even a trader, wholesale trader, when somebody comes to him as a customer, he may sell at an X price to a customer, and immediately the next minute another customer comes, he may sell it to another pricing. There are many, many dynamics which may happen. The customer sitting at the next shop may be getting another pricing of the same comparable goods. So the concept of market value, FMV, is very, very broad compared to when we look at ALP. ALP is a defined one single point because of the definition in the regulations that you have to work out one particular number. Similarly, API 10 talks about ordinary profits. So these are the concepts which are there. Now, if the transaction becomes a specified domestic transaction, then we clearly talk about ALP for all of them. So now the concept has moved from being broader terms to more a very pinpointed number, provided that transaction becomes a specified domestic transaction. So just to summarize out about market value and ALP, the distinctions, it is market value, again I said, what you will fetch in an open market. ALP is never necessarily meaning there. It could be one of the reasons, one of the pricings to look at it, but you could talk about, let's say, cost plus method, DNMM method, so that would give you different pricing for the same particular transactions. So there are no computation mechanisms for prescribed for market value, and again, deviation in a market value, once you work out, there is no kind of a deviation just prescribed, and it's not required, I would say, because it's more of a range pricing point. And compared to the ALP, you will have just a variation of plus minus 1% or 2%. So the moment a transaction is STD, including and more specifically for the tax holiday units, all these compliances which are prescribed in Rule NT, everything becomes applicable. Parallelly, as it is for any international transaction, you need to maintain all entity-related information, the price-related information, and the transaction-related information. I'm sure somewhere it was been the transfer pricing documentation has been covered, so I will not go into this particular aspect. Unlike in international transaction where there is a limit of 1 crore above which you need to maintain the documentation, there is no threshold prescribed for domestic TT. So the moment it is a domestic transaction, in terms of aggregating more than 5 crores, you have to maintain documentation without any threshold. So in a sense, 5 crore becomes a threshold limit for the transactions. And last, very, very important, along with this introduction of domestic TP, some penalty provisions were also changed, and they were very, very onerous in terms of 271(1)(c) explanation 7, which talks about 100 to 300% penalty. Now the very worrying part of this is the explanation 7 says the moment there is a TP adjustment, and now for domestic transactions, meaning thereby in case of a tax holiday unit, if there is an adjustment made by the assessing officer, transfer pricing officer, then the levy of penalty is automatic. The trigger for the penalty is automatic, unlike in other cases of non-transfer pricing adjustments, where he would take a call and satisfy himself before he triggers the penalty. In transfer pricing adjustments, the penalty trigger is automatic, and then the onus is on the taxpayer to demonstrate that he had undertaken this transaction in good faith. So the burden of proof is shifted on the taxpayers only for these kind of adjustments. And obviously the penalty is 100 to 300%. Then again, the non-maintenance of documentation for transactions is 2% of the transaction value, and that is why it's important to evaluate which transactions are covered and which are not covered. If there are some transactions which are covered and you do not report, then there is exposure of 2% of the transaction value penalty. And at the same time, we do not want to report transactions which are as such technically or legally need not be covered, because nobody in this world wants to over-report to a taxpayer and help him, okay, please invite trouble for himself. So this is a fine balance which we will have to look, especially in the context of APIA, which transactions are to be reported and which are not to be reported. And obviously the accountants report a small penalty of 1 lakh and another for a penalty for furnishing. So everything now applies in case of this tax holiday units also, all these penalty consequences. Okay, so let's look at few interesting issues now. Now, the first issue is in relation to domestic transfer pricing being applicable for all these tax holiday units. What is the period of applicability? Now, generally if you look at all these sections, they will talk about 10 out of 15 years, 10 out of 20 years, and assessee has an option, and many times we see that media within that consecutive period also, the assessee may decide to opt out because of losses. So the point is, which is the period for which the taxpayer has to comply, or these transactions become specified domestic transactions, and you need to maintain the documentation or supporting for it. Now there are three views on this, and we'll see which is the best view around it. If you look at, so let me, and Arapuge will take you through sections so that we are able to say why we are taking these particular three kind of alternate views. So 92BA talks about transactions covered in ATIA 8. Now ATIA 8 talks about where any goods and services held for the purpose of eligible business. So first of all, transactions referred to in 92BA take you to ATIA 8, and if only you are covered there, then you are covered. So now here the section talks about for the purpose of eligible business. So the unit has to be an eligible business. Now what is eligible business? If you go to ATIA 1, it reads where the GTI of an assessee includes profits and gains derived by an undertaking or enterprise from any business referred to in subsection 4, then bracket, here such business hereinafter referred to as eligible business. So the first time where eligible business is defined is in ATIA 1, which says that the business referred to in 4. Now you go to 4. 4 says this section applies to, and then it lists down all the businesses. Now one very interesting point is that the moment I am in this business, it is eligible business. So when I set up this unit, it becomes a eligible. Now nowhere under 4, which defines which is actually the eligible business, there is a time limit prescribed. So the moment I become an eligible business, I have nothing where I come outside it as a non-eligible business, because the duration has been defined and it is completely dealing to 4 is defined in subsection 2. So the view one which is I would say really outrageous, but it's a just simple technical reading of the way one by one if you read it, is that the moment any unit becomes, does this particular business, starts this business, it becomes an eligible business, and in perpetuity, it is an eligible business. The period for deduction is different. That is separately defined. But the business, when you start this becomes eligible business. So does it mean that in perpetuity, because there is no end point to eligible business definition, the compliances and the applicability applies? This is really a very far-fetched kind of a. The second is view is that in case when I start the business and I am eligible to claim 10 out of 15, then the second view is the 15 years entire period, that is the period for which I need to do the compliances. Entire 15 years or entire 20 years, if the block is for 20 years within which I get an option. And why? This obviously comes from subsection 2, which says give this option. So I am eligible for 20 years to claim the tax holiday. Within that I can claim any particular period. So that's the reason for taking this particular. And the third is, only in the years when I claim a tax holiday, meaning thereby out of a 10 consecutive period, if I miss out 2 years and I don't take tax holiday in that, then those 2 years are outside the purview of domestic TP. So essentially only for the number of years for which I am going to claim the tax holiday, I do the compliances. So it could be only for 3 years, it could be only for 6 years, or it could be only for a very limited, or I could never, I decided not to take it at all. So initially I was eligible, I thought I will take the tax holiday at a later period, but I continued to make losses and I never claimed any tax holiday. So now between the three views, which is the most appropriate or the right view which needs to be adopted? If you look at the intent of the section, clearly view 1 is out. So we don't need to really worry about that. But between view 2 and view 3, I and my firm, we have debated on this, and finally we have come on the particular view that we need to consider the second view as the most reasonable and appropriate, because what happens is, in case, let's say for the first 5 years I do not claim a tax holiday and I claim a tax holiday in the next 10 years, in the first 5 years there is an ability to maybe manipulate to some extent the pricing or transfer of some capital assets or any other things which can have an impact on the tax holiday working of the subsequent years. So if you were to just completely go by the intent of it, then this view seems to be extremely logical, that you do a compliance or the coverage for the entire period for which you have an option available, not just the number of years for which you are claiming the tax. So let's say in the third view, if mid-year somewhere you decide to opt out and you are not claiming tax holiday, and in that year you happen to do some kind of transfers or something, then the tax holiday losses could be reduced. One of the ability to manipulate, let's say you had a 10 crore loss, you can try and manipulate and bring that down to 9 crore so that for the subsequent year set off, the losses are less, so that your holiday can be higher. So those kind of things seems to suggest that the second view seems to be the most logical, appropriate, and should be supportable when it goes to litigation. Now the most very point about this, the inter-unit transfer. See, when it happens to a transfer of goods and services, very clearly there is no doubt about it. But obviously you will find in most of the cases that there are, let's say, 5 units in a company, and there is some lot of common expenses which is allocated to the units. Now the question is that, can these expenses which are allocated amongst 5 units be subject matter of SDT? Because for ATI 8, what is relevant is the income and the expenditure side. So the point would be, if head office is providing some common facility or some common kind of arrangement, would that tantamount to a service being provided by head office to the unit, and hence it becomes subject matter of ATI 8 transaction to be reported and to be benchmarked. Now, so again there are 2 views around this, and we will see which is a better view on this particular matter. So the point around here is very simple, that in case the unit, if we were to treat the unit as separate independent entity, and if this unit was not to take avail these services from the head office, then they would have availed it from some third party. So obviously in that sense it is a service, and hence since it is a service, it needs to be reported. But there is a separate view around it. What it talks about, ATI 8, is, first of all, there has to be transfer of goods or services between the units. And now let me just read this section a little bit, a few wordings again. What it says is, where any goods or services held for the purpose of eligible business. Now, can somebody say that these services are being held for the purpose of eligible business, or vice versa? Head office is not in the business of rendering this particular service. So this is more of an allocation between 2 units. It is not that head office is in the business. So let's take a scenario where